So this is going to be kind of a random video. I wanted to talk a little bit about my thoughts on the studio system right now, and part of the reasons that I think people are having such divisive reactions to the quote-unquote blockbuster movies that are being produced today, like the superhero movies, Star Wars, all that stuff. So, and this was mainly brought out by the pretty negative reaction I've seen online, and to people I've met, to the latest Star Wars movie, The Last Jedi. I saw the movie. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I was just kind of middle of the road with the movie. There were some things that really bothered me, that they just messed with the mythology a little bit too much. But then there were also some things I liked because they did take some chances and they took some risks, and it wasn't like a straight up copy of Empire Strikes Back, which it could have been. So overall, it was a mixed bag for me, the movie. But there's a lot of people out there that really don't like the movie. I've met people, and like I said, I've seen tons and tons of comments on YouTube, on Rotten Tomatoes, on everything. People just bashing this movie, really not liking it. And some reasons are valid, some really aren't. But all film is subjective, so I'm not going to say they're wrong. I'm just sometimes their reasoning isn't as well defended as other people's. Anyway, what I really wanted to try to get to though was, why is this? Why are movies being so divisive nowadays? The bigger movies, the tentpole movies, so to speak. The movies that have a built-in fan base already, because they're usually based on existing IPs, like comic book, like superhero movies being based on comic books. Star Wars, I mean, there's been now at least 8 films in the saga films, and then one spin-off movie. So there's been a lot, plus all the cartoons and everything. So I think part of it, I think there's a few reasons. One of the main reasons, I think, is that the executives, when they're picking people, when they're picking directors for these movies, if you ever notice, a lot of times the directors are not established directors. They're directors that have made a couple, maybe like 1 or 2 indie films. Indie meaning like a budget under, say, like $10 million. By Hollywood standards, a very small movie. And then they throw them into this $180 million movie, and they don't let them do what they're good at, essentially, which is make a movie that they want to make, not a movie that the executives in the studios demand that they make. Ridley Scott, the very talented and well-known director, he's directed Alien, Blade Runner, Gladiator. He's directed a lot of movies. He came out and he kind of said, echoing kind of what I'm thinking, the same thing, which was, he said it point blank. He actually said it's effing stupid what they're doing, their hiring process, and how they're choosing these directors. Because these guys that they're hiring, Rian Johnson for The Last Jedi, Colin Trevorrow for Rogue One. I mean, you just go down the list, and some of these superhero movies too. Some of the Marvel movies, some of the DC movies. They're people that do not have experience dealing with these big of budgets. On $200+ million usually these superhero movies cost, or at least $150 million always before marketing. And then because of that, these studios and executives have more power over them. They become yes men. They become people who will just do what the studio tells them to do, not necessarily make the movies that they're passionate about making, giving them a different voice, so to speak, to that movie. When George Lucas wrote, I mean, say what you want about the prequels, but when George Lucas wrote Star Wars, he wasn't catering to anybody. George Lucas was making the movies he wanted to make. He was making what he wanted to show audiences, didn't listen to the backlash, just said, you know what, I'm going to go out and I'm going to make these movies. The prequels, the first Star Wars movie, and his contributions to the story for the second and the third movie. I know he didn't direct those, Empire and Return of the Jedi, but he had a very heavy hand in the story of those movies. He wasn't catering to anybody. He was saying, these are the movies I'm going to make, that's that, deal with it. These young directors that have only done 1 movie or 2 movies, not in the studio system, very independently, they don't have that clout yet. They can't say that yet. So if you got a, I'm not saying Ridley Scott is a great director. He's very hit or miss. But if you got a director like Ridley Scott, you got a director like Christopher Nolan, who would never do it. You got a director like David Fincher. You got a director who said, no, I'm going to make the movie I want to make. And maybe the quality of the movie then would be a little bit better. There would be more of a voice to the movie. It wouldn't feel like it was a movie that was made by committee, so to speak, which I feel a lot of these movies have that feeling. The DC movies, and a lot of the Marvel movies as well, they feel like they're so stuck in the same formula because it's literally the same people that are having the creative control over these movies, the executives, the producers. Kathleen Kennedy with Star Wars. She has way too much power right now, the producer of the new Star Wars movies. She has got to, I mean, if they ever want to make a movie again that is not totally divisive and just like hated by hardcore fans, she's got to give creative control back to the director. Disney and the producer, they have to loosen up a little bit. I know these movies cost a lot of money, but it's been shown and proven by a director like Christopher Nolan with the original with the Dark Knight trilogy. He brought his own vision to the trilogy. He brought his ideas. He had full creative control, final cut. Warner Brothers let him do whatever he wanted to do. And look how successful that trilogy was. Two of the movies made over $1 billion, and one of them made over $500 million, the first one. So those movies, and I know Batman's a very popular character, but the movies were also very well received by movie fans and comic book fans. Comic book fans appreciated what Nolan was doing with the mythology, staying true to the characters, the essence of the characters, but taking risks in the sense that he wanted to make it more realistic and more grounded. And what if Batman was in our world, essentially, was his pitch for the whole trilogy, I think, to the studio. And it worked. It absolutely worked. Can you say that about any other franchise right now? Is there any other franchise right now that the director has the full creative control? James Gunn maybe for the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. I can't think of any others. Because the executives are so concerned that if they don't put out the exact same thing over and over again, that people are going to tune out. But that's not the case. People will tune in more if it's different because people want different. Look how successful Netflix is right now. Look how successful Hulu is. Amazon original. All this content is so successful right now. Why? Because the power is given to the creators. It is not given to executives who don't know what creativity is and don't know, and just don't understand that you have to let the director and the writer just express something that they feel. And then, great art doesn't give answers, it just proposes questions. That's my feeling, at least. All these movies just give answers. They don't propose any questions. I don't come out of any of these movies thinking, oh, wow, well, I wonder about that. I wonder about this. Oh, what would I have done if I was that person? I never think about that in these movies, ever. So that's one big reason, is the control needs to be given back to the directors and the writers. The only way to do that is to bring somebody in that's experienced and can say no and push back against the studio interference and the make by committee feeling that these films have. The other reason I think these films are very divisive is that Hollywood is in general very left-leaning. I mean, that's not a surprise. 98% of the actors that work there are. So, and most of the executives are, most of the directors and writers are, whatever, which is fine. The problem is when actors and directors, because of social media, and they all feel like they have to give their opinions on this stuff, which, why do we care? Why do they think people care? They're only good at one thing. They're good at acting. They're good at directing. They're good at writing. Suddenly, why is Jimmy Kimmel the philosopher of our time? I mean, it's asinine. Anyway, when they give their opinions and stuff like that, that turns a lot of people off. People don't want to go see the movies, and thus people will hate on those movies or nitpick or find reasons not to like those movies, specifically because that said actor in the movie has has just trashed, I don't know, who would name Obama or Trump or anybody. So the divisiveness is kind of created because of the people that are involved within the movie. That could be another reason. Um, I don't think that reason though is as big a reason as my number one reason, which is the studio interference and not having experienced directors. The third reason I think that these movies are so divisive nowadays is that there it's so hard to once you have something established and you're basing it off something like a comic book or it's sequel or it's like within a universe that's already been built like a Star Wars or like I don't know like a Indiana Jones or something like that. You have built-in expectations from fans. You have built-in expectations from moviegoers. What kind of a movie this is going to be? What kind of a universe this is going to be? And that comes into conflict then when the when you have people that are so far removed from the fans and so far removed from the original content that what they put out is the antithesis of that, so to speak. It goes against the mythology. It goes against character motivations. Like for example, in the latest Star Wars movie, Luke Skywalker has a very clear character trait throughout the whole original trilogy. To me, his biggest character trait and what defines him as a character is his endless optimism. He's an optimist. He sees the good in every situation, in every person. He literally thinks that he can turn his father, one of the most evil men in the galaxy, back to being a good person because he sees a little bit of hope, just a little bit, in him. Contrast that with The Last Jedi. You've got the whole story about Luke almost killing his nephew, because he sees a little bit of the dark side in him. He doesn't kill him, but he thought about it. And he like ignited his lightsaber and he was standing over and I'm like, Luke would never do that. That's not Luke. That's not the character. That is not what you took 3 films to establish. I'm sorry. I don't mind movies taking risks. I like when movies take risks. But I don't like, and I don't think a lot of fans like, when you've built up a character to be this way, and then suddenly, oh, he does a 180. It doesn't make any sense at all. That's just one example. There's tons of examples in this latest Star Wars movie where it doesn't make sense for a character within that unit that's already established would do something like that. Anyway, so I think that's the third reason is that people have expectations when there's a built-in when there's an established universe, established characters, established rules, and then you go in and you go against that. It pisses people off, and rightly so. like I said, the risk taking is fine from a story perspective. I like risk taking, but I'm down at the character level. It's trickier when you've got established property and you've got characters that have already had movies that they've gone through a character arc or progression. It doesn't make sense to go against that, really, to me, and I think to a lot of other people too. Because from what I've read, there's a lot of people that their reactions to Luke, they feel like they destroyed. Now, I don't think that destroyed the character because there was a lot of other things in the movie that were very Luke-ish. Luke kind of his views of the Force, I think, were in line with how his character ended in Return of the Jedi. So I don't think that was necessarily against the character. I mean, Mark Hamill even admitted in many interviews when he read the script, he's like, "Huh, that's not the direction I would take Luke. That's not who I think of when I think of Luke." But he did it anyway. He was a professional actor. He did it. He did what Rian Johnson asked him to do, which is fine. And Rian Johnson has the right to do that. And we as the fans have a right to say, well, that doesn't make any sense. So anyway, those are just three reasons why I think possibly there's such divisiveness right now in these types of movies. Personally, I don't go see a lot of them just because I know what you're going to get with most of them because it's a formula that they follow, so to speak. And they like I said, they don't put more faith in the directors and the writers to make their own visions for what they want to do and get something different, Like Sam Raimi brought something very different to the Spider-Man trilogy. Now, some people really didn't like the original Raimi trilogy. I liked it, or two of the movies. I liked the first two movies. He brought something different to it. He didn't stick straightly to the comic books, which I kind of liked. Um, but it was still familiar in the sense that he got the Peter Parker character, really his who he was as a character. I think he got that pretty right. So I think that's why a lot of people embrace those movies. Um, but yeah, anyway, leave your thoughts down below. What you think the problems are with the current system. What needs to change to start to get better tentpole, better blockbuster movies, because they used to be so great. You go back, you look at the original Star Wars movie, Jaws, even Jurassic Park, which was pretty recent, the original Jurassic Park, rather. These movies were not that divisive. They were so successful. Everybody loved them. They were nominated for Best Pictures. They were nominated for Best Director, Writer, all this stuff. And I think it was because they let the directors take these chances, and and fans really then embraced it because they brought their own vision to it, and they said, like with George Lucas, screw it, I'm just going to make what I want to make, or Ridley Scott, I'm just going to make what I want to make, and people are like, can like it or they can't, they don't like it. That's fine. That's film. You debate it. You debate its merits. But with established property, it's trickier. It's very hard. I mean, you're kind of in a no. You're kind of in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation with this kind of stuff. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. I'll follow up with some other videos just on the whole situation of the film industry as it is right now shortly.